Hello and welcome to the first video on Christianity for the RAC SOAR Studies of Religion study work. This is a quick summary to remind us of what we covered in class today, the historical and cultural background to Christianity. So important to understand how and where did Jesus come into the world? What was the history? What did he believe? Where did he come from? Well, there's lots to cover. We're not going to cover it all, but we want to cover a bit today. A bit of the maps and the history. What did he come into? So here we go. Year 11, Preliminary Course, Christianity. Number 1, the historical and cultural context to this amazing religion. From the syllabus, the point is the historical and cultural context in which Christianity began. What was the context? Do you look at this picture here? And what do you see? A bit of rubble? Well, yeah, that's what it is now, of course, but hey, 2,000 years ago, there were some pretty fine buildings here. Some fine buildings that people loved to live in. They walked down those streets, they went to the temple in this area because they loved God and wanted to worship Him. But there was lots of other stuff going on at the time as well, as people had to deal with the Roman Empire. Those rotten Romans that you have to deal with who suppress you and make things so much harder. Well, that's the context into which Christianity comes. But it comes into the context of Judaism as well. Where did Judaism start? Well, we have to go back to Abraham. The 3 promises to Abraham: land, children, blessing. And those 3 promises are worked out over 2,000 years until we finally get to Jesus, where they're fulfilled. More on how they're fulfilled later. But who are the key figures? I'd say Abraham's number 1. Moses, surely, number 2. The man raised by God to save his people out of slavery in Egypt. But number 3. The big kahuna himself, the little guy who defeated the giant. It'd have to be David. King David. The one who God made massive promises to. Promises for person to sit on his throne forever. In fact, one of his own descendants to do that. Wow. This is not just a few years, not just a few centuries. We're talking forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and it just keeps on going. So that's where Christianity starts, in this context of Judaism. You know, when I consider the history of the world, I want to go beyond just Judaism. I love Judaism. I love understanding. I love God's work through the Jews. But I need to go beyond. I need to understand the empires, the political forces that are at play at this time, because they are always present. Just the same that most of the most reported articles in the news today for us are politicians, our Prime Minister, opposition, whoever it might be. It was the same at this time too. The leaders had an impact on what was happening in the world. So let's delve into a bit of history here and see what was going on. So here's my really brief sketch of the empires that were around. We could start with the Egyptians, and of course Moses rescued God's people out of slavery in Egypt. But then we want to go to the Assyrian Empire, because that's when it really kicks up for the Jewish people, what these other empires are doing. You see, the Assyrians, in the time of Tiglath-Pileser III, well, he basically came in and took over the northern kingdom that had split in 922 BC. In 722, he comes in. And in fact, in 702 or 1, they come down and knock on the door of Jerusalem saying, "Let us in. We're coming in to take you, Hezekiah." Hezekiah says, "No way." He listens to Isaiah the prophet, who says, "Don't give in." And so they don't. And somehow this tiny, minute, little city resist the great Assyrian Empire, standing strong despite the threats that were coming their way in this mighty army at the gates of the walls of Jerusalem. As you can see in the right-hand picture here, it gets a little bit bigger, this Assyrian Empire, and even goes all the way down to Egypt, all the way down to the Persian Gulf. But that's not the only empire at the time. You see, rising up after them was the Babylonian Empire. Here's one image of the Babylonian Empire. You can see they're like the Assyrian Empire, except they actually come down here a bit more into the Red Sea area. They don't go quite over into Egypt. but generally considered a little bit bigger. Now under Nebuchadnezzar, oh boy, they were a nasty work. You see, they came in, they saw these Jews, they saw Jerusalem and said, we want that city, it's ours. And they took it. Took it over about 10 or 11 years, starting around 597 BC, but really 586, 87, they finally took over, taking out the leadership of the city and replacing it with their own, training the people to be Babylonian. As a result of this, the Jews are reduced down to what's called a remnant, a small amount, hardly anything left. From here, it looks like all hope is gone. How is God going to fulfill his promises now? There's no nation. There's just a few people. Well, the Persian Empire rises up. Cyrus the Great, he actually allows the people to return back to Jerusalem. Woohoo! It's sounding good. And the young people think it's great because they get to rebuild the temple. They rebuild this temple and they're so excited. There's this great wailing and whatever. But the old people are wailing too. But the young people go, yeah, we've got our temple back. And the old people are going, oh, it's not as good as it was. Oh, God, what's going on? And so the people don't have what they had. They don't have their great temple. They don't have this nation. And even if you just look at this Persian Empire, look how massive it is. We've now gone right over here to India. And we're going up here into the north and across into Egypt finally is conquered. Wow, this Persian Empire, it's bigger. Quickly through to the next one that becomes very significant for the early Christians. You see, the Greek Empire, which came along after the Persian Empire, bigger again. Yeah, it's not bad, is it? Look at how far it goes over to the right here, to India again, up north a bit further, but out left, out to the west here, Macedonia. You see, the other one stopped here at Lydia, but they've gone across here, across this Mediterranean, and across into the top of Egypt. But why is the Greek Empire so significant? The cultural change that they brought. You see, they also brought in so much more in culture, language, and the philosophers like Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, so important for all of history. This leads us finally to the Roman Empire, that empire that comes in and takes over more than anyone else. It allows the Jews to worship, but not to the same capacity, not to the same extent. And so it's into this context that Jesus comes. Jesus, the one who starts Christianity. And so very quickly, to summarise in a timeline what we've actually just covered. 1900 BC, of course, we get Abraham, the promise of nation, blessing, land. The 15th to the 12th, they're not exactly sure. The Jews are in slavery. Moses, the guy who comes in and redeems them. And then finally, in 1000 BC, that third major character, David, who has the promise that God will have a saviour, a Messiah, come from his line. 922 BC, the two kingdoms are split in two. 722, the Assyrians come in and invade. 597 to 586, the Babylonians take that southern kingdom, that last foothold. And so we come down to the 6th to the 4th, the Persians, allowing them to return home. The 4th to the 2nd, the Greeks, and this legacy of the official language and culture that they have over all of history here. 63 BC we'll put down as the date the Romans come in, and social and religious deprivation, heavy taxes. And so into this context we get Jesus born. The Greco-Roman context, Emperor Caesar Augustus, King of the Jews, Herod the Great, Governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. Long history of crisis for the Jews. Jews eagerly anticipated the promised Messiah. They were looking for him to deal with all these issues. So there's 5 key factions you could say exist. The Sadducees, a bit of the ruling, hold on to the traditions, see tradition. There's old fogies who just don't want to change things, that they like things the way they are. The Essenes, they sort of disappear out on their own. Don't talk to us. We want to go and have our own little community over here, just by ourselves. Just don't talk to us. Look, just do our own little thing. And so they're sort of a bit separatist. That's where the Dead Sea Scrolls come from. The Zealots, they're the rebels. They got no cause, but they're in there, they're fighting. They don't care what's happening around them. And the Pharisees, they're the law keepers. You don't do anything wrong with us because we will deal with you. And then finally, this last group that we're going to follow more on, that's the followers of Yeshua, or Jesus. Well, here's the intro. I hope that's a helpful intro for you.